The mop hit the floor with a wet slap, and David pushed it across the marble hallway for what felt like the 1,000th time that week. His back ached. His hands were raw from cleaning solution, and his old sneakers had given up squeaking hours ago. But he didn't mind. Not really. Because every evening, when everyone else went home, David got to experience something magical. The Riverside Concert Hall was one of those fancy places where rich people came to listen to classical music. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The seats were covered in red velvet that felt like touching a cloud. Everything smelled like expensive wood polish and old money. David had worked here for 3 years now. 3 years of mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and scrubbing toilets. 3 years of being invisible to the musicians who rushed past him, their expensive instrument cases bumping against his cleaning cart. They never said hello. They barely looked at him. To them, he was just part of the building, like the walls or the floor. But David had a secret. Every single day, he showed up 2 hours before his shift officially started. He'd clock in, park his cart in the storage room, and then sneak into the main auditorium. He'd climb up to the very last row where the cheap seats were, and he'd sit in the darkness and watch. The orchestra would be rehearsing down below, filling the massive hall with sound. And David would study everything. The way the conductor's hands moved through the air, how a tiny flick of the wrist could make the violins play softer, how a sharp gesture could wake up the drums. He memorized every movement, every pattern, every breath. Music had always been David's first love. His grandmother had taught him piano when he was little, back when his family had money for things like music lessons. She'd sit next to him on the old bench in her living room, her wrinkled hands guiding his small fingers across the keys. She taught him how to read music, how to feel the rhythm in his chest, how to let emotion flow through the notes. Music isn't just sound, baby, she used to say. Music is feeling. It's every happy moment and every sad one, all mixed together and turned into something beautiful. She'd wanted him to go to music school. She'd started saving money for it, keeping cash in an old coffee tin in her kitchen. But then she got sick. Cancer. The medical bills ate through her savings, then through everything else. David spent his senior year of high school taking care of her instead of applying to colleges. He'd play piano for her when the pain got bad, and she'd close her eyes and smile. She died 3 weeks before graduation. After that, life got harder. His mom worked 2 jobs, but it was never enough. Bills piled up. The electricity got shut off twice. They almost lost the house. David's dreams of music school felt like a cruel joke. So he did what he had to do. He got a job. Then another one. Then this one at the concert hall. And somehow, sitting in that back row every evening watching the rehearsals, he felt close to his grandmother again. Like she was there with him watching too. Tonight was special though. Tonight the whole place buzzed with nervous energy. The annual gala was tomorrow, the biggest event of the year. All the rich people in the city would be there. The governor was coming. The mayor, business owners who donated millions of dollars. The newspapers would cover it. Television cameras would be there. The orchestra had been rehearsing for weeks, and David had watched every single practice. He knew the program by heart. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the one everyone recognized even if they didn't know classical music. Then Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, which was so beautiful it made David's chest hurt. And finally, the New World Symphony by Dvorak, which his grandmother had loved. David pushed his mop down the hallway toward the dressing rooms. The musicians were getting ready to leave for the night, packing up their instruments. Through the open door, he could hear them talking and laughing. That's when he saw him, Maestro Victor Petrov. The famous conductor swept through the hallway like he owned the place, which in a way he did. Everyone treated him like royalty. He wore expensive suits that probably cost more than David made in 6 months. His gray hair was perfectly styled. His shoes were so shiny they reflected the ceiling lights. Petrov didn't even glance at David, just walked right past him like he wasn't there. The smell of his cologne hung in the air after he passed, something that probably had a French name and came in a crystal bottle. David had seen Petrov conduct hundreds of times from his hiding spot in the back row. The man was technically perfect. Every movement was precise, controlled exactly by the book. But something was missing. David couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the music always felt a little cold, a little distant. Like Petrov was more interested in being perfect than in making people feel something. David's Grandmother would have said the music had no heart. He pushed his cart into the storage room and locked the door behind him. This was his private space, the one place in the whole building that was really his. The other janitors used it during the day, but at night it belonged to David. In the back corner, hidden behind boxes of cleaning supplies and toilet paper, was an old music stand. David had found it in the trash a year ago, bent and scratched but still usable. He'd straightened it out and brought it down here. Next to it was a milk crate that he used as a stool. On the music stand was a pile of photocopied sheet music. The orchestra librarian threw away old marked-up scores all the time, and David had rescued them. He had the full program for tomorrow night's gala, every single page, covered in notes from various musicians over the years. David sat on his milk crate and opened to the first page of Beethoven's Fifth. Those 4 famous notes. Dum 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 dum, everyone knew them. But how many people really understood what they meant? Beethoven had written this symphony when he was going deaf. Can you imagine? Creating some of the most beautiful music in history while losing the ability to hear it? That took courage. That took heart. David stood up and raised his hands like he'd seen Petrov do 1,000 times. But he didn't copy Petrov's stiff mechanical movements. Instead, he conducted the way he felt it. The way his grandmother had taught him to feel music. He closed his eyes and heard the orchestra in his mind. Every instrument, every note. His hands moved through the air, painting pictures that only he could see. The violins sang. The cellos rumbled. The drums crashed like thunder, and David breathed with the music, let it flow through him, became part of it. He lost track of time down there in the storage room, conducting imaginary orchestras to an audience of mops and buckets. By the time he finished all 3 pieces on tomorrow's program, his arms ached and sweat dripped down his face. But he felt alive, more alive than he'd felt all week. David grabbed his cleaning cart and headed back upstairs. The building was mostly empty now, just a few security guards making their rounds. He had 6 hours of actual work ahead of him. Bathrooms to scrub, floors to mop, windows to clean. Tomorrow night he'd watch the gala from his secret spot in the back row. He'd see Petrov on that stage, conducting in front of all those important people. And for a moment, David would let himself imagine what it might feel like to stand there, to have an orchestra respond to his hands, to share his grandmother's gift with the world. But that was just a dream, a nice dream, but still just a dream. David didn't know that in less than 24 hours everything was about to change. The day of the gala arrived like any other day. David woke up at 5 in the morning in his small apartment, made instant coffee because the good stuff was too expensive, and ate toast while watching the sunrise through his window. His mom had already left for her first job at the bakery. She wouldn't be home until after midnight. He got to the concert hall early, like always. The place was already buzzing with activity. Florists were setting up massive arrangements of white roses in the lobby. Caterers carried trays of fancy food into the reception area. People in suits with clipboards rushed around checking everything twice. David grabbed his cart and started his rounds. He had a lot to do before the evening performance. The bathrooms needed to sparkle. The lobby floor had to shine like glass. Every single seat in the auditorium had to be dusted and checked. Around noon, the musicians started arriving. They looked different today, more nervous than usual. This wasn't just another performance. This was the performance, the one that mattered, the one that everyone would remember. David was cleaning the hallway near the dressing rooms when he heard voices. Loud voices. He recognized Maestro Petrov's accent immediately, that sharp way he pronounced his words. The tempo in the third movement is still too slow, Petrov was saying. We went over this yesterday. Why can you people not follow simple instructions? David heard some murmured responses, too quiet to make out. I don't want excuses, Petrov snapped. I want perfection. The governor will be here tonight. The newspapers. Television cameras. Do you understand what that means? It means no mistakes. Not one. David kept his head down and kept mopping. He'd learned a long time ago that it was better to be invisible. Rich people. Important people, they didn't like it when you looked at them. They wanted you to do your job and disappear. He moved closer to the dressing room, not meaning to eavesdrop, just doing his work. That's when he heard his name. Well, not his name exactly, but close enough.
Did you see the janitor yesterday?
One of the violinists said, laughing. He was in the storage room waving his arms around like he was conducting an orchestra. David froze. His heart dropped into his stomach. Someone had seen him? "Oh, I've seen him do that," another voice chimed in. A woman this time. "He sits in the back row during rehearsals sometimes. Watches everything. It's kind of weird if you ask me." "The janitor thinks he's a conductor." Petrov's voice boomed out, dripping with amusement. "How charming. How absolutely charming." More laughter erupted from the room. David felt his face burning hot. His hands gripped the mop handle so tight his knuckles turned white. "Should we say something to him?" someone asked. "Oh, I'll do better than that," Petrov said. David heard footsteps. He tried to move away, to disappear down the hallway, but it was too late. Maestro Petrov appeared in the doorway, and behind him a crowd of musicians gathered to watch the show. Petrov looked at David like he was examining a bug under a microscope. His lips curved into a smile that wasn't really a smile. It was the kind of expression people make when they think they're better than you. "Ah, there he is," Petrov said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our resident maestro. Tell me, my friend, did you enjoy your little concert yesterday? Down in the storage room?" David's mouth went dry. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, all those musicians staring at him, smirking, waiting to see what would happen. "I'm told you like to conduct," Petrov continued, taking a step closer. "You stand there with your mop and your bucket, and you pretend to be someone important, someone who matters." The words hit David like punches. Each one hurt more than the last. "Let me tell you something," Petrov said, his voice dropping lower, more serious. "Conducting is an art form. It takes years of training, decades of study. You go to conservatory, you learn from masters, you pay your dues. You don't just wave your hands around and call yourself a conductor." Someone in the crowd laughed. Others nodded in agreement. "You're just a janitor," Petrov said, and the way he said "just" made it sound like the worst thing in the world. "So stick to your mop, yes? Leave the music to those of us who actually understand it." David wanted to say something, wanted to defend himself, wanted to tell them about his grandmother, about how she'd taught him music before any of them had even picked up an instrument, wanted to tell them that he knew every note of tonight's program, that he could hear things in the music that Petrov missed. That talent didn't care about expensive schools or fancy degrees, but the words wouldn't come. They stuck in his throat like stones. He just stood there, head down, holding his mop while they laughed at him. Finally, a voice cut through the laughter. "That's enough, Victor." An older woman stepped forward from the back of the crowd. Her name was Helen, and she was the assistant conductor. David had seen her around for years. She was always kind to him, always said good morning, always treated him like an actual person instead of furniture. "The boy isn't hurting anyone," Helen said firmly. "Let him be." Petrov waved his hand dismissively. "I'm just having a bit of fun, Helen, no harm done." He turned back to David. "No hard feelings, yes? We all have our place in the world. This is mine." He gestured to the dressing room, to the musicians, to the whole grand building. "And that is yours?" He pointed at the mop. Then he walked away laughing, and the musicians followed him like baby ducks following their mother. Their chatter and giggles echoed down the hallway. Only Helen stayed behind. She walked up to David, her face soft with sympathy. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "Victor can be cruel sometimes. He forgets that not everyone had his advantages." David finally found his voice. "It's okay," he mumbled, even though it wasn't okay at all. "I've seen you, you know," Helen said. "In the back row. During rehearsals. You're always so focused, so attentive. You really love the music, don't you?" David nodded, not trusting himself to speak without his voice cracking. "Don't let him take that from you," Helen said. She patted his shoulder gently like his grandmother used to do. "The world needs people who love music, even if they're not on stage." Then she walked away too, leaving David alone in the hallway with his mop and his broken pride. He finished his shift in a daze, cleaned the bathrooms, mopped the floors, dusted the seats, did everything on his list like a robot, not really thinking, just moving. His mind kept replaying Petrov's words. "You're just a janitor. Just a janitor, just. By the time evening came, David almost didn't go to his usual spot in the back row. What was the point? Petrov was right. He was just a janitor. Who was he to think he could understand music the way trained professionals did? Who was he to dream about conducting? But then he thought about his grandmother, about how she'd sit at that old piano even when her hands hurt from the chemotherapy, About how she'd smile when he played, how proud she'd been of him, about how she'd always said that music belonged to everyone, not just the rich people who could afford fancy schools. So David climbed up to the back row one last time. The auditorium was filling up with people in tuxedos and evening gowns. Diamonds sparkled under the chandeliers. The air smelled like perfume and hairspray. David sat in the darkness and watched as Maestro Petrov walked onto the stage. The audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Petrov smiled and bowed, soaking in the attention like sunshine. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. Petrov raised his hands. David closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. And for a little while, he forgot about everything else. Forgot about the humiliation. Forgot about being invisible. Forgot about being just a janitor. For a little while, there was only the music. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours he'd be standing on that same stage. That the same people who'd laughed at him would be watching in stunned silence. That everything he thought he knew about his life was about to change forever. But for now he just listened. And he dreamed. David woke up the next morning feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Petrov's voice. "You're just a janitor." Just a janitor, he almost called in sick. Almost stayed in bed with the covers pulled over his head. But his mom needed him to work. They had rent due next week and the car needed new tires. So he got up, put on his uniform, and headed to the concert hall. The building felt different today, quieter somehow. Yesterday's gala was over, and now everyone was preparing for tonight's second performance. Same program, different audience. That's how it worked with big concerts. They did 2 shows so more people could attend. David grabbed his cart and started working. He tried to avoid the hallways where the musicians gathered, tried to stay invisible even more than usual. He didn't want to see Petrov. Didn't want to see any of them. Around 2 in the afternoon, David was mopping near the administrative offices when he heard shouting. Real shouting, not just the usual artist drama. He stopped and listened. "Call an ambulance. Now, someone help!" Maestro Petrov collapsed. David's heart jumped. He abandoned his mop and ran toward the commotion. A crowd had gathered outside Petrov's dressing room. Through the open door, David could see the famous conductor sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his face pale and covered in sweat. "I can't breathe," Petrov gasped, clutching his chest. I can't. 2 paramedics arrived within minutes. They'd been stationed nearby for the gala events. They checked Petrov over, asked him questions, took his blood pressure. David watched from the back of the crowd, trying to understand what was happening. "It's a panic attack," one of the paramedics finally said. "A severe one. His heart is fine, but he needs rest. Complete rest. No stress, no excitement. He shouldn't conduct tonight." "I have to conduct," Petrov insisted, his voice weak. "The performance." The audience. "If you go on that stage tonight, you'll likely have another attack," the paramedic said firmly. "Maybe worse. You need to go home and rest for at least a week." The concert hall's director, a woman named Patricia who always wore power suits and expensive jewelry, looked like she might faint herself. "We can't cancel. The tickets are sold out. The press is coming again. We have donors in the audience. This is impossible." Everyone started talking at once, arguing, panicking. "What about Helen?" someone suggested. "She's the assistant conductor. She can do it." Helen, the kind woman who'd defended David yesterday, stepped forward. But when she raised her right arm, David could see her wince in pain. "I was in a car accident last week," she said quietly. "Minor, thank God, but I injured my shoulder. I can barely lift my arm above my chest. I can't conduct a full performance. I'm sorry." The panic in the room grew thicker. Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'll call the university. Maybe they have someone available. A graduate student, anyone." "There's no time," the concertmaster said, checking his watch. "We need someone who knows this program. Who's seen us rehearse? Who understands how we play? You can't just bring in a stranger 4 hours before curtain." David stood in the back watching this disaster unfold. Part of him felt bad for Petrov. The man looked genuinely scared sitting there on the floor. But another part of him, a small dark part, felt something else, something that made him ashamed. A tiny voice that whispered, "Serves him right." Helen stood to the side, her hand unconsciously rubbing her injured shoulder. She looked worried, really worried. And then slowly her eyes moved across the room and landed on David. He saw something change in her expression, saw an idea form behind her eyes. an idea that probably seemed crazy to her. But she kept staring at him anyway, like she was trying to decide something. "I have an idea," Helen said suddenly. The room fell quiet. Everyone looked at her. "But you're all going to think I've lost my mind." "At this point, I'll take any idea," Patricia said desperately. Helen took a deep breath. "What about David?" Silence, complete silence. Everyone turned to look at him standing in the back corner in his janitor's uniform, holding a dirty mop. "The janitor?" Patricia said. Like Helen had suggested, they let a dog conduct the orchestra. "You want the janitor to conduct the most important concert series of the year?" "His name is David," Helen said firmly. "And yes, I've been watching him for 3 years. He sits in the back row during our rehearsals. Every single one. He studies everything. The way he moves his hands, even silently from his seat, it's clear he understands conducting." "This is insane," Patricia said. "She's right, though," one of the violinists spoke up, an older man named Robert who'd played with the orchestra for 20 years. "I've seen him too, in the back row. He's always there, always watching." "Watching doesn't mean he can conduct," someone else argued. "It's absurd," another voice added. Petrov, still on the floor, let out a weak laugh. "The janitor? You want to replace me with the janitor? This is what my career has come to?" Helen ignored them all. She walked across the room until she stood directly in front of David. Her eyes were kind but serious. "David," she said softly, "do you know tonight's program?" David's mouth felt like sandpaper. Everyone was staring at him. Important people. People with college degrees and fancy jobs and money. And here he was in his cheap uniform with cleaning solution stains on his pants. "Yes," he whispered. "Speak up," Helen said gently. "Do you know the program?" "Yes," David said louder. "I know it. How well do you know it?" David swallowed hard. This was the moment. He could lie. Could say he didn't know it that well. Could go back to being invisible, safe, just a janitor, or he could tell the truth. "Every note," David said. His voice grew stronger. "Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto in D major with Lisa Chen as soloist, and Dvorak's New World Symphony to close. I know every measure, every dynamic marking, every tempo change." Helen smiled. "Tell them what's wrong with the third movement of the Dvorak." David blinked. She was testing him. In front of everyone. He thought back to all those rehearsals he'd watched. Remembered something that had bothered him every single time. "The tempo," David said. "It's too fast. About 8 beats per minute too fast. It loses the emotion that way. Dvorak wrote that movement about longing for home. You can't rush longing. You have to let it breathe." Robert, the old violinist, let out a low whistle. "He's right. I've been saying that for weeks." "And the brass section," David continued, gaining confidence now. "In the finale, the big climax moment, they keep coming in early. Just a half beat, but it's enough to throw off the energy. It should hit like thunder, but instead it feels messy." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not disbelief. Something else. Something like respect. Patricia looked at Helen. "Are you seriously suggesting this?" "I am," Helen said. "He knows the music. He understands it. Maybe better than some of us do. But he's never conducted an actual orchestra," Patricia argued. "There's a difference between watching and doing." "Then let him try," Helen said. "Give him 5 minutes with the musicians. If it doesn't work, we cancel the show. But if it does work," she trailed off, letting the possibility hang in the air. Patricia ran her hands through her hair, looked at her watch, looked at Petrov still sitting on the floor looking defeated, looked at the panicked faces around her. "This is crazy," she muttered. "Completely crazy." "Sometimes crazy is all we've got," Helen said. Patricia closed her eyes, took a long breath, then looked at David. "You have 5 minutes," she said. 5 minutes with the orchestra, and someone find this man a tuxedo that fits." They found David a tuxedo. It belonged to one of the assistant stage managers, a guy named Tom who was about David's size. The pants were a little long and the jacket was slightly tight in the shoulders, but it would work. It had to work. David stood in the bathroom staring at himself in the mirror. He barely recognized the person looking back. In his janitor's uniform, he was invisible, but in this tuxedo, even one that didn't fit perfectly, he looked like someone who mattered, someone who belonged on that stage. His hands were shaking. He tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen. What was he doing? This was insane. He was a janitor, a kid from a poor family who'd learned music from his grandmother in a tiny living room. These were professional musicians. People who'd spent their whole lives training. People who'd played in front of thousands. What if he froze up there? What if his mind went blank? What if they laughed at him again? There was a knock on the bathroom door. "David, it's time." Helen's voice, gentle but firm. David took one last look at himself in the mirror, thought about his grandmother, about how she used to say that fear was just excitement wearing the wrong clothes, about how she never let anything stop her from playing, not poverty, not sickness, not even death, until it finally took her. He opened the door. Helen stood there with a small smile. "You ready?" "No," David said honestly. "But I don't think I'll ever be ready, so I might as well do it now." She laughed, a real laugh, warm and encouraging. "That's the spirit, come on. The orchestra is waiting." They walked down the hallway together. David could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Each step felt like walking toward either his greatest triumph or his most humiliating failure. There was no in-between. The stage door opened, and suddenly David was standing in front of 90 musicians. 90 pairs of eyes staring at him. Some looked curious. Some looked skeptical. A few looked downright angry. He could read their thoughts on their faces. "This is ridiculous. We're really doing this? The janitor is going to conduct us?" David walked to the podium on legs that felt like jelly. Someone had placed a conductor's score there, open to the first page of Beethoven's Fifth. Those 4 famous notes. Dum 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 dum. The notes that everyone in the world knew. The notes that could make or break him in the next 5 minutes. "Hello," David said. His voice came out as a squeak. He cleared his throat. Tried again. "Hello, I'm David. Most of you know me as the guy who mops your floors. And I know this seems crazy. Believe me, I think it's crazy too." A few musicians chuckled. Not mean laughter. Just nervous energy. "But I want you to know something," David continued. "I've watched you rehearse for 3 years. Every single day. I've seen you work. I've seen you struggle with difficult passages and then nail them perfectly. I've seen the way you communicate with each other without words. The way the violins breathe together. The way the brass section feels each other's energy. You're not just good. You're incredible." He saw some faces soften a little. Robert, the old violinist, nodded. "I know I haven't been to fancy schools," David said. "I haven't studied with famous teachers. But my grandmother taught me something important. She taught me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about making people feel something real, something true." David picked up the conductor's baton. It felt strange in his hand, light and heavy at the same time. "So I'm asking you to give me 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. And if it doesn't work, I'll go back to my mop and we'll figure something else out. Deal?" He looked around the orchestra, waited, held his breath. Robert raised his violin bow in a small salute. Then the woman next to him did the same. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire string section had raised their bows. "Okay, kid," Robert called out. "Show us what you've got." David turned to face the orchestra, raised his hands. This was it. Everything came down to this moment. All those hours in the back row, all those nights in the storage room, conducting imaginary orchestras, all those dreams he'd barely let himself dream. He took a breath, thought about his grandmother one more time, then he gave the downbeat, dum 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 dum. The sound hit him like a physical force. He'd heard this opening thousands of times in recordings and rehearsals in his head, but this was different. This was real. These were real instruments, real people, real sound waves traveling through the air and straight into his chest, and they were following him. His hands, his gestures, his vision. David didn't conduct like Petrov. He couldn't. Petrov's style was all precision and control, every movement measured and perfect. David conducted the way his grandmother had taught him to play piano. From the heart. He let the music move through him, let his body express what the notes meant. When the strings needed to swell with emotion, he opened his arms like he was embracing someone he loved. When the drums needed to crash like thunder, he drove his hands down with real force. When the woodwinds played their delicate parts, he shaped the air with his fingers like he was molding something precious and fragile. The musicians responded. David could see it happening in real time. They weren't just playing notes anymore. They were playing music, real music. the kind that made your chest tight and your eyes wet. He pushed them through the first movement, then took them into the second. The slower, more gentle part. This was the test. Anyone could conduct the loud, dramatic parts. But could he make them feel the quiet moments too? David closed his eyes for a second, remembering his grandmother playing this exact passage on her old piano, remembering how she'd made those simple notes sound like someone whispering a secret. He opened his eyes and looked at the cellos. Made eye contact with the principal cellist, a woman named Rachel. With just his expression, without words, he tried to communicate what he wanted. Not just quiet, but intimate, like telling someone you love them for the first time. Rachel understood. He could see it click in her eyes. She adjusted her bow, and when she played, the sound was different. Warmer, more vulnerable. The other cellists matched her, and suddenly the whole section was breathing together, playing like one voice instead of many. The 5 minutes flew by. David lost track of time completely. There was only the music and the orchestra, and the magic happening between them. He guided them through Beethoven, showing them colors and emotions they'd played 100 times before, but maybe never quite like this. When he finally lowered his hands and the last note faded away, the stage fell silent. David stood there breathing hard, his shirt soaked with sweat under the borrowed tuxedo. He had no idea if it was good or terrible. His brain felt scrambled. His arms ached. His heart raced. Then Robert stood up. The old violinist stood and started tapping his bow against his music stand. Tap, 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 tap. It's what orchestra musicians do to applaud another musician. It's the highest honor they can give. One by one, every single musician in the orchestra stood and tapped their instruments. The sound filled the concert hall like rain on a roof. Helen walked onto the stage, tears streaming down her face. "That was beautiful," she whispered to David. "That was real music." Patricia, the director, appeared from the wings. She looked stunned. "I can't believe what I just saw. Did that really just happen?" "It happened," Helen said.
"He's ready."
More than ready. Patricia stared at David for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, you're conducting tonight. Both the Beethoven and the Dvorak. Helen, can you handle just the Tchaikovsky with your injured shoulder? It's shorter." "I'll manage," Helen said. "This is insane," Patricia muttered again, but she was smiling now. "David, you have 4 hours to get ready. 4 hours until the biggest performance of your life." David wanted to say something profound, something meaningful, but all that came out was, "Can I tell my mom?" And everyone laughed. David called his mom from the backstage payphone. His hands were still shaking as he dialed the number. "Hello?" Her voice sounded tired. She was probably on her break between jobs. "Mom, it's me. You're not going to believe what just happened." He told her everything, the whole crazy story. When he finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. For a moment he thought she'd hung up. "Mom, you still there?" "I'm here, baby," her voice cracked. "I'm just crying." "Your grandmother would be so proud." "She's watching, you know." "I know she is." "I wish she could really be here," David whispered. "She is here. She's in every note you conduct, every movement of your hands. That's her gift living on through you." His mom paused. "I'm coming to watch. I'm leaving work right now. They can fire me if they want. I'm not missing this." David hung up the phone with tears in his eyes. He had 3.5 hours until showtime. The concert hall buzzed with confused energy. Word had spread that something unusual was happening. The janitor was conducting. People didn't know whether to be excited or worried. Patricia spent the whole afternoon managing phone calls from board members and donors who'd heard rumors and wanted to know what was going on. David spent those hours in the storage room, his storage room, going over the score one more time, every measure, every note. He'd memorized it years ago, but he studied it again anyway. This wasn't about perfection. This was about being ready, about honoring the music and the orchestra and everyone who believed in him. Helen checked on him an hour before the performance. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified," David admitted. "But also excited? Is that weird?" "That's exactly right," Helen said. "If you weren't scared, I'd be worried. Fear means you care. It means this matters to you." She handed him a small box. "This was my father's. He was a conductor, too. Not famous, but good. He loved music more than anything. I want you to have it." David opened the box. Inside was a conductor's baton, old and worn but beautiful. The wood was smooth from years of use. "I can't take this," David said. "Yes, you can. My father always said a baton is just a stick unless someone breathes life into it. You'll breathe life into it. I know you will. The minutes ticked by. David changed into the borrowed tuxedo again. Combed his hair. Tried to calm his racing heart. Failed completely. Then it was time. The audience filled the concert hall, their voices creating a low rumble of anticipation. David peeked through the stage door and saw his mom sitting in the front row. She'd actually come. She was wearing her nice dress, the one she saved for special occasions. When she saw him peeking, she waved, and he could see she was crying again. Next to her, David spotted Maestro Petrov. The famous conductor had insisted on attending despite his doctor's orders. He sat there in his expensive suit, his face pale and drawn. When he caught David's eye, his expression was unreadable. Not angry, not supportive. Just watching. Patricia gathered everyone backstage. Okay, people. This is happening. David, Helen, you're both going to be incredible. Musicians, you've got this. Let's make history tonight. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The audience fell silent. This was it. Helen went first, conducting the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto with Lisa Chen as soloist. Even with her injured shoulder, Helen was magnificent. The audience gave them a standing ovation. Then it was David's turn. He walked onto the stage in his borrowed tuxedo that was too long in the legs and too tight in the shoulders. He walked past 90 professional musicians to the conductor's podium. He stood in the spotlight with hundreds of eyes on him. Rich people, important people, critics, reporters, his mom. And for just a second, the fear almost won, almost made him turn around and run. Who was he to be here? Who was he to think he could do this? Then he saw Robert, the old violinist, giving him a small nod. Saw Rachel, the cellist, sitting ready with her bow. Saw the entire orchestra looking at him not with mockery, but with trust. They were giving him a chance. Really giving him a chance. David raised Helen's father's baton. The borrowed wood felt right in his hand now. Like it belonged there, he took a breath. Thought about his grandmother one last time. Heard her voice in his head, clear as day.
Music is feeling, baby.
Every happy moment and every sad one. All mixed together and turned into something beautiful. David gave the downbeat. Dum, 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 dum. Beethoven's Fifth exploded into the concert hall like a thunderstorm. But this wasn't Petrov's cold, perfect Beethoven. This was alive. This was human. This was joy and pain and hope all crashing together in four simple notes that somehow contained everything. David conducted the way his grandmother had taught him to live, fully, honestly, without holding anything back. When the music swelled with triumph, he lifted the orchestra up with his whole body. When it dropped to whispers, he shaped the silence with his fingertips. He didn't just conduct the notes. He conducted the emotions behind them. The musicians responded like they'd been waiting their whole careers for this. They'd played Beethoven hundreds of times before, but never like this. Never with this much heart. The violins sang with voices that sounded almost human. The cellos rumbled like the earth itself. The percussion drove through the rhythm like a beating heart. David lost himself completely in the music. Forgot about the audience. Forgot about Petrov watching from the front row. Forgot about being a janitor or being poor or being anything except this moment. This music, this magic. When the final note of Beethoven's Fifth crashed through the hall and faded into silence, nobody moved. The audience sat frozen, like they'd all been hit by lightning at the same time. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole audience exploded in applause. People stood up, cheering, crying. The musicians stood at their chairs and tapped their bows and instruments. The sound was deafening. David stood at the podium, breathing hard, sweat running down his face, barely believing what had just happened. But he wasn't done yet. There was still the Dvorak, the New World Symphony, his grandmother's favorite. He waited for the audience to settle. Then he raised the baton again. The New World Symphony is about longing, about being far from home and missing everything you love, about hope and sadness mixed together. David had felt that longing his whole life. Longing for a life where music wasn't just a dream, where poverty didn't steal opportunities, where people saw him as more than just a janitor. He poured all of it into the music, every lonely night, every humiliation, every secret hope. And the orchestra followed him into those depths. They played like they were telling their own stories too. Everyone has longed for something. Everyone has felt far from home, even when home is just a feeling, not a place. The third movement, The one that had always been too fast, David took slower. Let it breathe. Let the sadness sit in the room and be felt. People in the audience openly wept. Even the musicians had tears on their faces as they played. When the final movement arrived, the triumphant ending, David didn't hold back. He conducted with everything he had left. The brass blazed, the strings soared, the percussion thundered, and this time the brass section came in exactly right, hitting that climax like a perfect bolt of lightning. The final chord rang out, huge and bright and full of hope. David held it, stretching it out, letting it fill every corner of the hall. Then slowly he lowered his hands. Silence. Perfect silence. For one beautiful moment, nobody breathed. Then the audience erupted. This wasn't just applause anymore. This was something else. Something bigger. People were on their feet, shouting, crying, clapping until their hands hurt. The ovation went on for 10 minutes, then 15. Critics who never smiled were wiping their eyes. Rich people who came to be seen were actually moved. David turned to bow, and that's when he saw Petrov. The famous conductor was standing in the front row with tears streaming down his face. Their eyes met, and Petrov did something David never expected. He bowed. Actually bowed to David. After the performance, after the endless curtain calls and the backstage chaos, after the reporters and the board members and everyone wanting to talk to him, David finally found his mom. She grabbed him in a hug and wouldn't let go. Your grandmother was here, she whispered in his ear. I felt her. She was so proud, baby. So proud. Helen appeared with her arm around Patricia. David, we need to talk about your future. I'm thinking assistant conductor position to start, with full training and mentorship. If you want it. I want it, David said, his voice barely working through the emotion. Patricia smiled. You start Monday. But not as a janitor, as a conductor. 6 months later, David would conduct at the National Theater. A year later, he'd start a foundation for young musicians from low-income families. He'd give them the chances he'd never had. He'd make sure talent wasn't wasted because of poverty. But that night, standing backstage in his borrowed tuxedo, David just hugged his mom and let himself feel everything. The joy, the relief, the impossible truth that dreams sometimes do come true, even for janitors. You were never just a janitor, Helen said softly, echoing what she'd told him before. You were always a maestro. The world just needed to catch up and see it. David smiled. His grandmother had been right all along. Music was feeling. And tonight he'd helped hundreds of people feel something real, something beautiful, something true. That was all that mattered.